The massive space station hung in the darkness like a silver flower, its petals made of metal and glass reaching toward the distant stars. Inside those gleaming corridors, children from 100 different worlds walked together, their voices mixing in languages that had never been spoken on the same planet before. This was the Academy of 1,000 Worlds, the greatest achievement of the Galactic Education Consortium, and today, it would become the stage for something that would shake the foundations of known space. Taman pressed his face against the viewing window in the main corridor, watching the pale green moon of Kepler 442c turn slowly below them. At 12 years old, he was small even by human standards, with dark hair that always seemed to stick up no matter how much his mother tried to flatten it down. His earth-brown eyes were wide with wonder as he watched ships from dozens of worlds dock at the station's lower ports. Some looked like crystals that had learned to fly, others moved like liquid metal flowing through space, and a few seemed to be made of pure light that hurt to look at directly. "Stop daydreaming and come on," his sister Sora called from behind him. She was only 10 but already taller than many of the alien children in their year. Where Taimeen was quiet and thoughtful, Sora was quick and sharp, always asking questions. That made their teachers uncomfortable. "We're going to be late for xenobiology class again." Taimeen sighed and turned away from the window. The corridor around them was filled with the usual morning crowd of students heading to their classes. A group of Alteran crystal children clinked softly as they walked, their bodies catching and reflecting the artificial sunlight from the ceiling panels. Near them, 3 nebulites floated in their environmental suits, their gaseous forms swirling in colors that had no names in any human language. The corridor itself was wide enough for the largest species to move comfortably, with gravity fields adjusted so that everyone could walk normally, regardless of what world they came from. "Where's Juan?" Taimeen asked, as they joined the flow of students moving toward the education sectors. "Advanced combat theory," Sora replied, adjusting the strap of her learning tablet. "He said he'd meet us for lunch if he doesn't get detention again." Their older brother was 16 and had been at the academy for 3 years now. Juan was everything Taimeen wished he could be: tall, confident, and respected by students from every species. He had their father's strong jaw and their mother's quick intelligence, but there was something else about him that Taimeen couldn't quite understand. Sometimes when Juan looked at the alien students, especially the bigger ones, there was a watchfulness in his eyes that reminded Taimeen of the wild animals in the nature documentaries from Earth. They reached the xenobiology classroom just as the warning chime sounded. The room was arranged in curved tiers so that students of all sizes could see the central teaching platform. Taimeen and Sora found seats in the middle section, surrounded by a mix of species that represented most of known space. To their left sat Crix, a young hegemony student whose purple-scaled skin gleamed under the lights. Crix was friendly enough, but like most of his species, he believed that might made right and that weaker beings should defer to stronger ones. The door at the back of the room hissed open, and Instructor Vextal entered with his usual heavy stride. He was massive even by hegemony standards, standing nearly 3 meters tall with 4 powerful arms and skin the color of old bronze. His species had evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the strongest survived, and they had carried that philosophy with them to the stars. The hegemony controlled 17 star systems and had never lost a war, which made them natural choices for positions of authority in institutions like the Academy. Vextal's 4 eyes scanned the classroom with the calculating gaze of a predator, sizing up potential prey. When his gaze fell on the human students, his expression showed barely concealed disdain. Humans were newcomers to galactic society, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 60 years ago. To species like the hegemony, who had been traveling between stars for millennia, humans seemed like children playing at being adults. "Today we will discuss neural plasticity across species," Vextal announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "The ability of a brain to adapt and change in response to new information and experiences." He activated the holographic display in the center of the room, showing cross-sections of brains from different species. The Alteran neural structure looked like a crystalline lattice that pulsed with inner light. The nebulite consciousness appeared as a swirling cloud of energy patterns. The human brain looked almost primitive by comparison, soft, gray, and unremarkable. As you can see, Vextal continued, gesturing with two of his arms while the other, two remained crossed behind his back. Some species possess neural structures that are clearly superior to others. The Alteran consciousness can process information at speeds that would be impossible for most organic brains. The nebulites can exist as pure thought when necessary. And then we have species like humans, whose neural plasticity is limited by their biological constraints. Taman felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Around him, he could sense the other human students shifting uncomfortably in their seats. He knew he should stay quiet, should not draw attention to himself, but the words came out anyway. "That's not right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The classroom fell silent. Vextal's four eyes focused on Taman like targeting lasers, and the boy felt suddenly very small and very alone. "What did you say, human child?" Taman's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to continue. "Human neural plasticity isn't limited, the way you said. We can rewire our brains throughout our entire lives. We can learn new languages, new skills, new ways of thinking, even when we're old. Some species can process information faster, but they can't change the way they think once. Their neural patterns are set." The instructor's expression darkened. Around the room, alien students leaned forward in their seats, sensing that something important was happening. The Alteran children chimed softly among themselves, while the nebulites swirled faster in their environmental suits. "You dare to contradict your instructor?" Vextal's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think your inferior species knows better than established galactic science?" "I'm not saying humans are better," Taman replied, his voice growing stronger despite the fear that made his hands shake. "I'm just saying the information you're giving isn't complete. Every species has different advantages. Humans might not be the fastest or the strongest, but we can adapt in ways that—" The blow came without warning. Vextal's massive hand struck Taman across the face with enough force to send the boy tumbling from his seat to the floor. The sound echoed through the classroom like a gunshot, followed by absolute silence. Taman lay on the floor, his cheek burning where the instructor had hit him. He could taste blood in his mouth and felt tears gathering in his eyes, though he fought to hold them back. Around him, the alien students stared in shock. Physical punishment of students was not uncommon in some cultures, but striking a child from another species was a serious breach of Academy protocol. "Let that be a lesson to all of you," Vextal said, his voice calm and controlled. "Question established knowledge, and you will be corrected. The strong guide the weak, and the weak must learn their place." What happened next would be analyzed and discussed by xenobiologists, military strategists, and philosophers across the galaxy for generations to come. In the observation section at the back of the classroom, where advanced students sometimes came to audit lower-level classes, Juan had been taking notes on neural development theory for his own studies. He had looked up just in time to see the instructor's hand connect with his little brother's face. The change in Juan was instantaneous and terrifying. His breathing shifted from the slow, relaxed rhythm of someone listening to a lecture to the quick, controlled breaths of a predator preparing to strike. His dark eyes, which had been focused on his tablet, now locked onto Instructor Vextal with an intensity that made the air in the room feel electric. Around the classroom, every human student and staff member suddenly turned toward the front of the room. Sujin, the human teaching assistant who had been grading papers in the corner, looked up with the same predatory alertness that had seized Juan. Jinwoo, a 14-year-old human boy in the third row, slowly stood from his seat, his movements careful and deliberate. Mincio, who had been taking notes, quietly activated her tablet's recording function without taking her eyes off the instructor. The alien students began to notice the change in the humans around them. The Alteran children's crystalline bodies dimmed as they sensed the shift in the room's emotional atmosphere. The nebulites' swirling patterns slowed and became more focused, their alien consciousness recognizing that something fundamental had altered in the space around them. Vextal, still standing over Taman's prone form, was oblivious to the change. He had made his point and expected the lesson to continue as normal. In his experience, lesser species accepted correction and moved on. He had no way of knowing that he had just triggered something that had been refined by millions of years of evolution on a world where pack hunters had learned to coordinate T. Juan's first strike had been calculated to disable, not destroy. As Instructor Vextal staggered backward, gasping for air, the human teenager pressed his advantage with movements that seemed almost choreographed in their precision. His left hand shot forward in a palm strike that connected with the instructor's throat, while his right foot swept behind the alien's legs, destroying his balance completely. The massive hegemony instructor crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder, his bronze-colored skin scraping against the smooth classroom surface. Vextal's forearms flailed as he tried to regain control, but Juan was already moving again, his actions flowing from one technique to the next with deadly efficiency. What terrified the watching alien students was not the violence itself. Many of their species were far more physically capable than humans. What froze them in their seats was the cold calculation behind every movement. There was no rage in Juan's face, no wild anger or loss of control. His expression was focused and determined, like a surgeon performing a delicate operation or an engineer solving a complex problem. Vextal managed to roll over and push himself up on his forearms, his predatory instincts finally kicking in. He was 3 times Juan's size and possessed strength that could crush most organic beings. But as he lunged forward with his massive hands extended, something impossible happened. Juan seemed to simply not be where the instructor expected him to be. The human boy flowed around the alien's attack like water, his movements so smooth they seemed to defy the basic laws of physics. As Vextal's momentum carried him forward, Juan's elbow connected with the side of the instructor's head with surgical precision. The impact was perfectly placed to cause maximum disorientation without permanent damage, and Vextal's eyes rolled back as he collapsed face first onto the classroom floor. The sound of the instructor's feeding teeth scattering across the metal surface was like dice being thrown by an angry god. Each small, sharp tooth clinked and rolled until the classroom fell into absolute silence once again. Juan stood over the fallen instructor, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. His dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and there was a small cut on his knuckle where it had connected with one of Vextal's teeth, but otherwise he appeared completely unharmed. Around the classroom, every human student had remained perfectly still during the confrontation. Their positions changed just enough to provide clear lines of movement and mutual support if needed. The alien student stared in complete shock. Crix, the young hegemony student sitting next to where Tai Min had been, made a small whimpering sound that no one had ever heard from his species before. The Alteran children had gone completely transparent, their crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme distress. The nebulites had compressed themselves into tight defensive spirals within their environmental suits. Su Jin, the human teaching assistant, moved from her position in the corner with the same fluid grace that Juan had displayed. She knelt beside Tai Min, who was still on the floor holding his injured cheek, her hands gentle as she examined the damage. Her movements were economical and precise, checking for concussion, testing jaw movement, evaluating the extent of the bruising that was already beginning to darken his skin. Mild contusion, possible minor jaw displacement, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone with medical training. No permanent damage. Only then did she turn her attention to Instructor Vextal. The massive alien was conscious but dazed, thick purple blood seeping from his mouth where several of his feeding teeth had been knocked loose. Su Jin's examination of him was just as thorough as her check of Tai Min, but there was something different in the way she moved around the fallen instructor. Her positioning ensured that she could react instantly if he showed any sign of renewed aggression. Concussion, dental trauma, possible fractured jaw. She reported to the room at large. He'll need medical attention, but his life is not in danger. As if summoned by her words, the classroom door burst open, and Captain Yun of Station Security entered with 4 of his officers behind him. The security team was mixed species, but Yun himself was human, a compact man in his 40s with graying hair and eyes that took in every detail of the scene with professional assessment. "What happened here?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping from the injured instructor to Juan. who had not moved from his position beside Vextal's prone form. Instructor Vextal struck a human child, Jinwoo said from his seat in the third row, his voice calm and factual. Juan responded to defend his brother. Captain Yun's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He knelt beside the fallen instructor, checking his pulse and examining his injuries with the same professional competence that Su Jin had shown. After a moment, he stood and activated his communication device. "Medical team to Classroom 7 Alpha," he said into the device. "We have 2 injured parties requiring immediate attention." While they waited for the medical team to arrive, a strange thing happened in the classroom. The alien students began to whisper among themselves, their voices carrying undertones of fear and confusion that their translators couldn't quite capture. They had all grown up with the understanding that humans were weak, physically inferior to most galactic species, dependent on technology and cooperation rather than individual strength. What they had just witnessed challenged everything they thought they knew about humanity. Juan was not particularly large by human standards, yet he had defeated an opponent 3 times his size with techniques that seemed to come from nowhere. More disturbing still was the coordination they had observed from the other humans in the room, the way they had all moved into supporting positions without any visible communication, as if they shared some kind of group consciousness. Crix, who had always been friendly with the human students but had never considered them as anything more than amusing pets, found himself looking at Sora with new eyes. She was still sitting, beside her brother, holding his hand and whispering reassurances. But there was something in her posture that he had never noticed before. She was alert and watchful, her dark eyes constantly scanning the room for potential threats, ready to act if anyone else moved toward her injured sibling. The medical team arrived within minutes, a mixed group of species trained in treating the various forms of life found throughout the galaxy. They worked quickly and efficiently, stabilizing Instructor Vextal and preparing him for transport to the station's main medical facility. The lead medic, a tall Alteran whose crystalline body pulsed with soft diagnostic lights, spent several minutes examining the instructor's injuries with obvious puzzlement. "The trauma is very precisely applied," the medic reported to Captain Yun. "Maximum incapacitation with minimal permanent damage. Whoever did this has extensive training in combat techniques." Captain Yun glanced at Juan, who was now helping his little brother to his feet. "How long have you been studying martial arts?" "Since I was 5, Juan replied simply. "My parents thought it would be good for building discipline and physical fitness." What he didn't mention, and what none of the aliens in the room could have understood, was that his training had not been in martial arts, as they might define them. Human combat techniques had evolved from millions of years of pack hunting and cooperative survival. Every movement, every technique, every strategy was built around the fundamental principle of protecting the group and neutralizing threats with maximum efficiency. The Alteran medic moved on to examine Taimin, his diagnostic lights revealing the extent of the bruising and swelling on the boy's face. "This child will recover fully, but he should be monitored for the next 24 hours. The force of the blow was significant." As the medical team prepared to leave with Instructor Vextal, Captain Yun turned to address the classroom. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years maintaining order in a complex, multi-species environment. "Classes are suspended for the remainder of the day," he announced. "All students will report to their assigned quarters and remain there until further notice. A full investigation will be conducted into this incident." The alien students began filing out of the classroom, their movements subdued and uncertain. Many of them cast nervous glances back at the human students, who were gathering around Taimin to check on his condition. The easy camaraderie that had existed between species in the classroom had been replaced by something more complex, a mixture of fear, respect, and uncertainty that would take time to resolve. Min-Seo approached Captain Yun as the room emptied, her learning tablet in her hands. "Captain, I recorded the entire incident. The footage clearly shows that Instructor Vextal struck Taimin first, and that Juan's response was defensive in nature." Yun accepted the tablet and reviewed the recording, his expression growing darker, as he watched the instructor's unprovoked attack on the human child. When the footage reached the point where Juan's response began, He slowed the playback and watched with professional interest as the teenager systematically dismantled an opponent 3 times his size. "Send this to my office immediately," he instructed Mincio. "And make sure copies are forwarded to the Academy Administration and the Galactic Education Consortium." As the humans prepared to leave the classroom, as the news spread through the Academy of 1,000 Worlds like wildfire, carried by students returning to their quarters and whispered conversations in the corridors. By evening, every being on the YER station had heard some version of what had happened in Classroom 7 Alpha, and the details grew more dramatic with each retelling. Ambassador Li Dongha was in his office reviewing trade agreements when his personal communication device chimed with an urgent message from Captain Yun. The ambassador was a distinguished man in his 50s, with silver threading through his black hair, and the kind of calm demeanor that had served him well in years of diplomatic negotiations. As he read the security report, however, his composure cracked for the first time in decades. "Sweet, merciful Earth," he whispered, sinking into his chair as the full implications of the incident became clear. The door to his office opened, and his wife entered, her face tight with worry. Dr. Kim Na-ri was the station's chief xenopsychologist, a brilliant woman whose research into interspecies relations had helped establish many of the protocols that governed life at the Academy. She had been in her laboratory when the news reached her, and she had immediately left her work to find her husband. "The children?" she asked, though she already knew from his expression that they were safe. "Taemin is bruised but otherwise unharmed," Lee replied, handing her the tablet containing Captain Yoon's report. Hwan defended him, and apparently the instructor who started this whole mess is in the medical bay with several broken teeth and a concussion. Nari read through the report quickly, her trained mind analyzing the details with professional interest even as her maternal instincts screamed with protective fury. When she reached the section describing Hwan's response, she paused and read it again more carefully. "This is remarkable," she said quietly. "The coordination, the precision, the level of tactical thinking. Dongha, do you understand what this means?" The ambassador looked at his wife with confusion. "It means our 16-year-old son just assaulted a faculty member and is probably going to be expelled from the most prestigious educational institution in known space." "No," Nari said, her voice growing excited as the implications became clear to her. "It means we've just provided the galaxy with its first clear demonstration of human protective protocols in action. 3 levels down, in the medical bay, Instructor, Vextel was regaining consciousness for the 3rd time since the incident. Each time he woke, the reality of what had happened seemed more impossible than before. He was a hegemony warrior, trained from birth in the arts of combat and dominance, descendant of apex predators who had conquered 17 star systems. The idea that he had been defeated by a human child was beyond his ability to accept. Dr. Zethran, the Alteran medic treating him, monitored his patient's vital signs with growing concern. The physical injuries were healing well. The hegemony possessed remarkable regenerative abilities, but the psychological trauma appeared to be more severe than initially assessed. Patient shows signs of acute disorientation and reality displacement. Dr. Zethran noted in his medical log, "Repeated requests for clarification of events suggest possible cognitive dissociation. May require extended psychological evaluation." What the medic didn't understand, and what none of the non-human staff could grasp, was that Vextal's worldview had been fundamentally shattered. His entire species based their social structure on the principle that physical dominance determined worth, that the strong naturally ruled the weak. To be defeated by someone he considered inferior challenged everything he believed about himself and his place in the universe. In the human quarters of the Academy, a different kind of reaction was taking place. Word of the incident had reached every human family on the station, and the response was immediate and coordinated. Parents began arriving at the medical bay to check on Taemin, their movements purposeful and their expressions grim. Human staff members quietly adjusted their schedules to ensure that no human child would be alone with non-human faculty until the situation was resolved. Wu Jin, a human journalist who covered Academy affairs for the Galactic Education Network, was working late in his office when the story broke. As he read through the initial reports and watched Minseo's recording of the incident, he realized he was looking at something far more significant than a simple disciplinary matter. "This changes everything," he muttered to himself as he began, drafting what would become the most widely read article in the history of interspecies journalism. The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to Ambassador Lee's office. Representatives from a dozen different species arrived to express their concern, their curiosity, or in some cases, their demands for action against the human students involved in the incident. The ambassador received them all with diplomatic courtesy, but there was something different in his demeanor that the more perceptive visitors couldn't help but notice. The first to arrive was Chancellor Mordak, the hegemony administrator who oversaw disciplinary matters at the academy. He was even larger than Instructor Vextal, with scars across his bronze skin that spoke of countless battles fought and won. He entered the ambassador's office with the confident stride of someone who expected immediate submission to his authority. "Ambassador Lee," he said without preamble, "your offspring attacked a faculty member without provocation. By hegemony law and academy regulation, he must be expelled and punished according to our customs." The ambassador regarded the chancellor with calm eyes, his hands folded neatly on his desk. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled, but there was something beneath the surface that made Chancellor Mordak shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Chancellor, I've reviewed the recording of the incident very carefully," Lee said. "My son defended his younger brother from an unprovoked assault by a faculty member. If anyone should be facing disciplinary action, it's Instructor Vextal." The instructor was correcting improper behavior, Mordak replied, his forearms gesturing dismissively. "Physical correction is a standard teaching method among civilized species." "Not among humans," the ambassador replied, and for the first time, since the chancellor had entered the room, his diplomatic mask slipped just slightly, and certainly not when applied to our children by members of other species. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Chancellor Mordak found himself looking into the ambassador's dark eyes and seeing something that made his predator instincts scream danger. This was not the weak, compliant human he had expected to intimidate into submission. This was something far more dangerous, a parent whose child had been threatened. The meeting ended without resolution, but as Chancellor Mordak left the ambassador's office, he found himself thinking about the human teenager who had dismantled Instructor Vextal with such clinical efficiency. For the first time in his long career as an educator, he began to wonder if the hegemony's understanding of other species might be fundamentally flawed. Meanwhile, in the Academy's main laboratory, Dr. Nari was conducting an emergency session with her research team. The xenopsychologists had been studying interspecies interactions for years, but the previous day's incident had provided them with data that challenged many of their basic assumptions about human behavior. "Look at this footage again," she said, projecting Minseo's recording onto the main display screen. "Watch how the other humans in the classroom respond to the threat." The team studied the recording in slow motion, focusing not on Juan's attack, but on the subtle movements of every other human in the room. Sujin's positioning, Jinwoo's defensive stance, Minseo's decision to record everything for evidence. Each action seemed small and insignificant on its own, but together, they formed a pattern that was both fascinating and terrifying. "It's like watching a single organism respond to a threat," Dr. Yethmos, a nebulite researcher, observed. "Each individual takes action that supports the group response, but there's no visible communication between them." "Exactly," Nari said, her excitement growing as she began to understand the implications. "We're looking at an evolutionary adaptation that no other known species possesses. Humans don't just respond individually to threats against their young. They respond as a coordinated unit, with each member automatically taking whatever action is most beneficial to the group." The research team spent the next several hours analyzing every aspect of the incident, comparing human behavioral patterns to those of other species in similar situations. What they discovered would fundamentally change galactic understanding of human psychology and social structure. Other species, when faced with a threat, typically responded with either fight or flight behaviors on an individual level. Some might work together if they had time to coordinate, but the response was generally either aggressive or defensive, not both simultaneously. Humans, however, seemed to automatically organize themselves into tactical units when their young were threatened, with some individuals taking offensive roles while others provided support, gathered evidence, or prepared for medical emergencies. It's military-level coordination, Dr. Yethmos observed, but it appears to be an instinctive response rather than trained behavior. As word of the research team's findings began to sprout, looked back at. 2 weeks after the incident, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what was being called the human question. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Crystal Chamber on Nexus Prime, their voices creating a cacophony of languages, harmonics, and electromagnetic frequencies that the universal translators struggled to process simultaneously. The session was called to order by Prime Minister Zexa Thala of the Alteran Confederation, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. As the senior member of the council, she had the responsibility of maintaining order during what promised to be a contentious debate about humanity's place in galactic society. We are here to discuss the implications of recent events at the Academy of 1,000 Worlds, she announced, her voice carrying the harmonic overtones that marked her species' formal communication mode. The human defensive response, as it has come to be called, has raised questions about the nature of human psychology and the potential threat they may pose to galactic stability. Ambassador Lee sat in the human delegation section, flanked by Admiral Park and Dr. Nari, who had been called in as an expert witness. Across the chamber, Chancellor Mordak represented the hegemony position, while dozens of other species sent their most senior diplomats to observe the proceedings. The first speaker was Dr. Yethmos, the nebulite researcher who had been part of Nari's analysis team. His gaseous form swirled within his environmental suit as he presented the findings that had shocked the academic community. Honored delegates, he began, his translated voice carrying none of the emotional undertones that characterized his species. Natural communication. Our analysis of the Academy incident has revealed behavioral patterns in humans that are unprecedented among known sapient species. The holographic display at the center of the chamber activated, showing frame-by-frame analysis of the classroom incident. Dr. Yethmos highlighted the movements of each human present, demonstrating how they had automatically coordinated their responses without any visible communication. What we see here is not trained behavior or conscious strategy, he continued. This appears to be an evolutionary adaptation that allows humans to function as a single tactical unit when their young are threatened. The implications for military and social theory are profound. Chancellor Mordak rose from his seat, his bronze skin gleaming under the chamber's lights. The hegemony disputes these findings, he declared, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. What we witnessed was simple pack behavior, no different from what any predator species might display. The humans have clearly been training their offspring in military techniques while claiming to be a peaceful species. With respect, Chancellor, Dr. Nari interjected, rising to address the assembly. That interpretation ignores several key factors in the analysis. Prime Minister Zexthala granted her permission to speak, and Dr. Nari activated her own presentation. The display showed comparative behavioral analyses between humans and other known pack-hunting species, with clear differences highlighted in multiple colors. Traditional pack behavior involves individuals working together toward a common goal, through learned coordination and established hierarchy, she explained. What we observed in the Academy was something entirely different. Instantaneous role assignment based on individual capabilities and situational requirements, with no apparent command structure or pre-established plan. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats. Their various forms of attention focused intently on the human xenopsychologist. Moreover, Dr. Nari continued, subsequent interviews with the human students involved revealed that they had no conscious awareness of their coordinated response until after the incident was over. This suggests that the behavior is triggered by subconscious processes, possibly linked to neurochemical responses that evolved to protect human offspring. Representative Kilthera of the Vegan Republic, a tall insectoid being with compound eyes, that could see across multiple spectrums simultaneously, clicked her mandibles in a pattern that indicated deep thought. "Dr. Nari," she said, her translated voice carrying mechanical overtones, "are you suggesting that humans possess a form of collective consciousness that activates during threat situations?" "Not collective consciousness in the traditional sense," Dr. Nari replied. "Rather, we believe humans have evolved a form of distributed tactical intelligence that emerges during specific threat scenarios. Each individual maintains their personal autonomy while simultaneously contributing to a group response that maximizes the chances of protecting their young." Admiral Park stood to address the assembly, his military bearing evident even in the unfamiliar environment of the Galactic Council chamber. "If I may, distinguished delegates, I'd like to address the military implications that seem to concern many of you." Prime Minister Zexthala granted him permission to speak, and the Admiral moved to the center of the chamber, where his words would carry to all sections. "The incident at the Academy was not the result of military training," he said clearly. "The human involved was a 16-year-old student with no formal combat experience, beyond basic physical fitness training. What you witnessed was the equivalent of a parent protecting their child, a natural response that exists in some form across most species." "But surely," interjected Governor Hextar of the Centauri Collective, "the level of coordination and tactical precision we observed suggests extensive preparation and training." Admiral Park shook his head. "Governor, human military training actually works to override these instinctive responses. We train our soldiers to follow orders and maintain unit cohesion, rather than relying on individual initiative. What you saw at the Academy was pure evolutionary programming, the kind of response that kept our species alive on a world where cooperation was essential for survival." The debate continued for hours, with representatives from various species expressing concerns, curiosity, and in some cases barely concealed fear about humanity's true nature. The turning point came when Representative Morden of the peaceful Lyrian Confederacy stood to address the assembly. The Lyrians were one of the oldest sapient species in the galaxy, having achieved interstellar travel when most worlds were still developing their first complex life forms. They were renowned for their wisdom and their commitment to peaceful resolution of conflicts, which made their words carry particular weight in council proceedings. "My friends," Representative Morden said, his melodious voice carrying the wisdom of millennia, "I believe we are approaching this question from the wrong perspective. We have spent hours discussing humans as though they were a potential threat, to be contained or an asset to be utilized. Perhaps we should instead consider what their unique capabilities might contribute to galactic society." He moved to the center of the chamber, his graceful form seeming to glide across the crystal floor. The Lyrian archives contain records of hundreds of species that have achieved sapience throughout galactic history. Many were individually superior to humans in various ways, stronger, faster, more intelligent, longer-lived. Yet none of them developed the kind of protective coordination we have observed in humanity. The assembly listened with rapt attention as the ancient being continued his address. "Consider the implications not for warfare, but for peacekeeping. A species that instinctively protects the young of any group they consider their own could serve as natural guardians for the galaxy's most vulnerable populations." Ambassador Lee felt a chill run down his spine as he realized where the representative's thoughts were leading. The idea of humans as galactic protectors was both flattering and terrifying, carrying implications that would fundamentally change humanity's role in interstellar society. The archives show us that most species develop either aggressive expansion behaviors or defensive isolation when they encounter other sapient life. Representative Morden continued. Humans appear to have developed something unique, the ability to extend their protective instincts beyond their own species to include anyone they perceive as part of their community. Dr. Yethmos swirled in his environmental suit, his gaseous form taking on patterns that indicated intense analysis. Representative Morden raises a fascinating point. Our observations at the Academy showed that human protective responses were triggered not just by the threat to their own young, but by the presence of other species' children in the same environment. The humans positioned themselves to protect the entire classroom, not just their own siblings. This revelation sent a ripple of discussion through the assembly as delegates considered the implications. A species that would instinctively protect the children of other races could indeed serve a unique role in galactic society. But it also raised questions about human motivations and long-term intentions. Chancellor Mordak rose again, his expression showing the strain of having his species' worldview challenged so fundamentally. Even if we accept these interpretations, he said, the question remains, can we trust a species whose defensive capabilities so clearly exceed their apparent physical limitations? How do we know that this protective instinct won't be turned against us if humans decide we pose a threat to their interests? The chamber fell silent. 6 months had passed since the incident that changed everything, and the Academy of 1,000 Worlds had settled into a new rhythm of life. The corridors still echoed with the voices of children from across the galaxy, but there was a different quality to the sound now, a sense of security that had not existed before. Taimin walked through the main corridor toward his xenobiology class, no longer the quiet, uncertain boy who had questioned Instructor Vextal's teachings. The bruises had faded long ago, but the confidence he had gained from that terrible day remained. Other students moved aside as he passed, not out of fear but out of respect, recognition that he was under the protection of something far more powerful than any individual strength. Taimin, wait up, called Crix, the young hegemony student who had once sat beside him in class. The purple-scaled alien jogged to catch up, his powerful legs covering the distance quickly. 6 months ago, Crix had viewed humans as amusing but inferior beings. Now he counted several of them among his closest friends. How did your presentation go? Taimin asked as they walked together toward the classroom. Better than expected, Crix replied, his voice carrying pride mixed with lingering amazement. I never understood before how much humans actually know about neural adaptation. My research partner Sora helped me see connections I would have missed completely. The friendship between Crix and the human siblings had developed gradually over the months following the incident. At first, the young hegemony student had approached them with caution, even fear, but he had slowly come to understand that human protective instincts were not a threat to those who meant no harm. In fact, being considered part of a human's extended pack brought advantages he had never imagined. They entered the classroom to find it already half full with the usual mix of species. The seating arrangement had changed since the incident. No longer did students cluster purely by species, but instead mixed freely throughout the room. Human students could be found scattered among every group, their presence serving as an invisible guarantee of safety for the smaller or more vulnerable species. At the front of the room, the new instructor was preparing for the day's lesson. Dr. Veltara was an Alteran who had volunteered to take over the xenobiology curriculum after Instructor Vextal's early retirement. Her crystalline form gleamed softly as she arranged her teaching materials, and her manner with students was gentle and encouraging, a marked contrast to her predecessor's harsh approach. Today we will be discussing evolutionary advantages and how different species have adapted to fill specific ecological niches, she announced as the last students took their seats. Who can give me an example of a trait that might seem like a disadvantage but actually provides significant benefits? Sora's hand shot up immediately, and Dr. Veltara nodded to her with the kind of warm attention that had become standard for human students throughout the academy. The change in teaching approaches had been one of the most immediate consequences of the incident. No instructor wanted to be the next to discover what happened when human protective protocols were activated. Humans have relatively weak individual, physical capabilities compared to most galactic species, Sora said clearly. But our pack coordination abilities more than compensate for those individual limitations. What looks like weakness is actually a different kind of strength. Excellent observation, Dr. Veltara replied, her harmonic voice carrying approval. Can anyone think of other examples where apparent weakness masks hidden advantages? The discussion that followed would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Students from different species openly acknowledged each other's strengths and weaknesses, secure in the knowledge that diversity was valued rather than merely tolerated. The presence of human students in every class had created an environment where bullying was simply not possible, not because of rules or regulations, but because everyone understood that threatening any member of the group would result in immediate and overwhelming response. After class, Taemin made his way to the observation deck where he often spent his free time. The massive viewing windows provided a spectacular view of the space around the station, including the steady stream of ships arriving and departing from the docking bays. What he saw today, however, was different from anything he had witnessed before. A massive hegemony battlecruiser was docked at one of the main ports, its bronze hull gleaming in the reflected light of the nearby star. Beside it, looking almost delicate by comparison, was a human diplomatic vessel flying the flags of both Earth and the Galactic Education Consortium. The sight of the two ships together represented something that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a familiar voice from behind him. Taemin turned to see Captain Yun approaching, his security uniform bearing new insignia that reflected his recent promotion to Chief of Academy Security. The captain had become something of a celebrity in security circles throughout the galaxy, his handling of the incident used as a case study in crisis management at institutions across known space. "What's happening?" Taemin asked, nodding toward the docked ships. "Formal treaty signing," Captain Yun replied, joining the boy at the viewing window. "The hegemony is requesting that human security advisors be stationed at their educational facilities. Seems they've had some problems with aggressive instructors and want to make sure nothing like the Vextal incident happens again." Taemin absorbed this information with the kind of sophisticated understanding that had developed in many human children since the incident. They had all become inadvertent ambassadors for their species, living examples of humanity's unique place in galactic society. "Captain," he said thoughtfully, "do you think what happened was worth it? All the changes? All the attention?" Captain Yun considered the question carefully before responding. 6 months ago, human children were second-class citizens at this academy. Today, they're probably the safest students in the entire galaxy. I'd say that's worth a few broken teeth and some diplomatic complications. As if summoned by their conversation, Juan appeared on the observation deck, moving with the same fluid grace that had become his trademark throughout the academy. At 17 now, he had grown into his role as an unofficial protector and leader among the human students, but the responsibility sat lightly on his shoulders. "Dad wants to see you," he told Taemin. "Something about a special announcement." The three of them made their way to Ambassador Lee's office, where they found a gathering that represented the new reality of human-galactic relations. Ambassador Lee stood behind his desk, flanked by Admiral Park and Dr. Nari, while several alien dignitaries occupied chairs arranged around the room. The atmosphere was formal, but warm, very different from the tense meetings that had characterized the weeks immediately following the incident. "Ah, excellent timing," Ambassador Lee said as they entered. "I wanted you boys to hear this directly from me." He activated a holographic display that showed an official document bearing the seals of the Galactic Council and dozens of member species. "The Council has formally requested that Earth establish a new branch of government, the Office of Galactic Child Protection Services. We've been asked to provide security advisors, educational consultants, and emergency response teams for academic institutions throughout known space." Taemin felt his breath catch as the implications became clear. "We're going to protect alien children too?" "Not just protect," Dr. Nari said, her voice bright with excitement. "We're going to help create educational environments where all species can learn and grow together safely. The research data we've gathered has shown that mixed species learning environments actually accelerate development in most young beings, but only when they feel truly secure." Admiral Park stepped forward, his expression serious but pleased. "What your brother did in that classroom 6 months ago didn't just defend you, Taemin. It demonstrated to the entire galaxy that humans have a unique capability for protection that extends beyond our own species. Now they want us to use that capability to make the galaxy safer for everyone's children." One of the alien dignitaries rose from his chair, Representative Morden of the Lyrian Confederacy, whose words at the Galactic Council had helped shape the new understanding of humanity's role. His ancient features showed satisfaction as he addressed the gathered humans. The Lyrian archives have been updated to include detailed records of human protective protocols, he said in his melodious voice. Future generations will study your species as an example of how evolution can produce traits that benefit not just the individual species, but the entire galactic community. As the formal meeting concluded and the dignitaries departed, the Lee family found themselves alone in the ambassador's office. The weight of what had just occurred was still sinking in. Humanity had been formally recognized not just as members of galactic society, but as essential protectors of its most vulnerable citizens. "This is going to change everything," Juan said quietly. "Not just for us, but for every human family in space." Ambassador Lee nodded gravely. "With great capability comes great responsibility. We'll need to be very careful.